Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to Live with Lindsay. And I'm here today with Roxanne Derhodge. Hi, Roxanne.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you.
So, Roxanne is a, oop, sorry about that. Roxanne is a mental health and wellness specialist. She's a registered psychotherapist, speaker, and consultant. And Roxanne's with us today to talk to us about how authentic leadership improves the bottom line. And Roxanne, I think this is such an important topic to be speaking about nowadays because I think there has been a huge shift towards a more human side of business with everything going on. And I'd love it if you could just start off by telling us, how do you define authentic leadership? What does that mean to you?
Well, authentic leadership is where leaders really kind of look at the impact that they're having around people, around them, right? We know that that's really, really needed in building trust. So even prior to the unprecedented times that we've been in, there's always been a need for transparency, honesty, dignity, as we manage companies, as companies manage their business units. But even more so, I would say, in the last 6 to 7 weeks to 2 months, there's been even more need for leaders to show the civility that's needed so that their employees understand that they get it,
Mm.
and gone are the days where leaders are meant to be separate from their employees and their stakeholders, but to really get a sense that they're going through it as well. And that's what's the basis of a lot of the research on authentic leadership is: am I experiencing you as a leader, as a person that has obviously the capacity to run things, but am I experiencing the same things as you are? Because if I feel like as a
Mm.
leader you're just you're unscathed in any way, I'm going to think, well, I'm feeling all these adverse things with uncertainty. Why are you not showing me any of that at all as a person?
It's really interesting what you're saying about how it's about people feeling that their experience is real and is being experienced by others in some ways. Is that sort of what I'm hearing?
Absolutely, because we're all people at the end of the day, and I've been fortunate enough to interview a lot of leaders that show that transparency. And in my time, some of the interviews that I've done recently, I've spoken to some immensely transparent leaders that have talked, some small employees bases where they picked up the phone. And as
Mm.
the uncertainty was unrolling, there was one particular leader. He had a lot of calls to make, but what he did is him and his executive team ensured that he had a conversation. So imagine how powerful that is,
Mm.
right? All of this is unfolding. It's acute. We're stressed, we're anxious, we're unaware of what's going to happen. And then you get a call from your CEO just to say, hey, Lindsay, how are you doing? I know this is an unprecedented time. We're all swirling. I'm just reaching out to let you know that even though we don't know what's going to happen, that I'm here and I'm going to be doing the best on behalf of our company.
Mm.
And just to hang in there and try not to worry, try to take care of your family, those types of things, and we'll figure it out together. So if you just think
Mhm.
of that powerful interaction with someone reaching out at an executive level around that time.
Yeah, for sure. So I'd love, I'm going to do better. I'm going to try to do better this time with the comments, as those watching last week know. So if you are here, please let us know that you're here, where you're watching from. And if you have any questions for Roxanne, by all means, please throw those into the chat and I will do my best to share those with her. Roxanne, though, I'd love to hear from you what you think it is about the current situation that's really bringing this out in some leaders, this, willingness maybe to engage in conversations that seem sort of taboo almost before the current situation.
Well, I think what choice do you have at this point? There's so much uncertainty, and initially, when we're in a crisis situation, if we look at this, we have never been through. We always say in a VUCA world of business, which is volatility, uncertainty, and ambiguity. There's so much going on in business, and companies are having to always deal with that. But then you times that by, say, 10 with the pandemic. There is such a need now for employers to look at and say, how am I able to let people experience us as being someone that's relatable? Because there's already been massive layoffs there, so you're having people being laid off daily in some companies. And I've heard about really bad layoffs where some leaders are getting on Zoom calls and laying off people without the CEO or the senior executive team delivering the message. So when you think about it, and if it's a temporary layoff, what you want to do is motivate people to feel like, I'm still going to be connected. It's still a great company. They're doing their best.
Yeah.
At this particular point, they have to make some changes. But, more than likely, I may get called back. But if you want your people to potentially come back and bring their capacity with them, they should be treated with dignity and respect. To be able to think that if when you are feeling an upturn, you don't want to lose all your skill sets of people that are laid off, because people will be looking. Let's face facts. Everybody has to take care of their families. But when I should say you do get that upturn, you want to be able to start calling back people and be able to integrate them back in a way that works for us as human beings. So whoever's staying, you want to motivate them to work really, really hard and to focus and maintain productivity. And when you're integrating people back in that have been laid off, what has been their experience with the layoff? And how are they going to integrate back in? So it's just so many things that you have to consider in leadership right now, of which, communicate. And you are the communication gurus, you get it. So gone are the days where we can stop and wait and say, I'm going to communicate when I find out. You have to communicate as much as you can with the uncertainty. Even if you don't know, let people you don't know. And that you are also in that position where you're kind of lost for words as well, but you're sharing that element with them so that people can go, oh, I get it. You're trying to meet me where I'm at. And so that, I'm going to come back to work potentially, try to do my best to reintegrate, to go back to that position or a different position within the company. And you're not going to be losing, all the skill sets to your competitors or to different environments.
Yeah. So what do you think holds people back from having those conversations like you talked about, when they're not sure of the future? And so they just don't want to talk about it until they're sure, because the reality right now with the pandemic is there's very little we can be sure about in terms of the future. What is it that holds people back from admitting that or from having those conversations?
Well, I was, earlier this week, I was listening to a talk from Columbia Business School, and they talked about senior executive teams like to wait till the last minute because they don't want to give too much information, because how are employees going to manage it? And what's being asked of by employees is, tell us early. Tell us as much as you know, as often as you can, and give us as much information as you can, even if it's bad news, and do not overpromise, especially at this time. Because to your point, Lindsay, a lot of companies don't know.
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to interrupt and celebrate that I have found the comments and I can now get your questions asked. So I'm highly proud of myself with my limited technical skills. So hello to everyone watching. Like I said, if you have questions for Roxanne, please do share. I have one here from Kimberly I'll ask in a moment. But before I do that, your comment made me think of back when I was in my early 20s and I was living in Paris at the time. And my grandfather was quite ill with leukemia and actually died of leukemia when I was in Paris. And I learned of it, all of it, after he had died. And in fact, my family had not even wanted to let me know that he had passed because they didn't want to ruin my year abroad. I was living in Paris for the year. And I was angry. I was very angry that they had not told me that he was ill and had not let me make that decision as to whether I'd come home or not. And at the end of the day, I felt that their desire to protect me from those hard feelings, which are tough, of course, when it's a loved one, kind of overstepped into not letting me decide what was right for me, and they almost felt I couldn't handle that. And I'm wondering if that's part of what you're saying here with leaders, is that this desire to not burden somebody with concerns and worries, is that part of what keeps people from having these conversations sometimes, sort of a protective vibe around it?
Well, we have to look at this as a disaster. It was an unexpected thing that came on us. And none of us like to feel out of control. As human beings, we're always trying to find certainty or buckets to put things in buckets to make sense.
Right.
So I don't know about you, Lindsay, if you've made sense of this pandemic, but none of us
I don't
were
know if any of us
expecting
have.
it. Right. And we keep going back to what is the new normal? We don't even know what that definition entails. So I think leaders, because I often talk about when I'm coaching leaders, is they have to be aware of their internal space and their awareness about how they feel about change. How do they manage their stressors internally? How do they react? Are they more autocratic when they're stressed? Are they are they the type that they don't want to show their vulnerability? So in turn, they cut that off and they deliver more, kind of straightforward communication? Or are they the type that can step back and say, I've been flawed. I'm flawed here. And I'm not sure how to deliver this to you. And I'm trying to figure out, how to deliver this to my children. I have elderly parents. Maybe I have someone in my home that's compromised. And I'm trying to also figure out what it is to work virtually, and decide who's going to stay at the office, who's going to social distance in the office, who I'm going to temporarily work on maybe potentially a shorter work week so we don't have layoffs. So there's a lot of pressures.
Yeah.
So the more that you can share that we're all in this together, shoulder to shoulder, and I'm going to figure it out. And when I figure out things and I do it badly, I'll let you know as much as I can. And then I'm going to pivot my behavior accordingly. So I think with authentic leadership and leading from the heart, if I can experience you as my leader coming from that place of authenticity, I'm more likely to say, I get Lindsay. I get that she is going through certain things. And in fact, when she is available to me, what happens is then I say, okay, I get it. I can run my team. I can, recognize that people are stressed out. They're anxious. They're depressed. And you're shifting as a CEO dealing with a pandemic, and it's unprecedented. You've never done it before, and you're trying to you're trying to understand what you need to do to cope effectively so that you can manage. And I think a lot of times at senior executive levels, people believe that they have to be always in control. But again, this time is showing us that things that will actually keep people connected is seeing you as more real, more authentic, more honest, more transparent.
Yeah. One thing that stood out to me that you said there was about how almost that people can be more forgiving of those moments when in stress you're falling into patterns that are, like you said, becoming more autocratic or becoming very distanced because you're overwhelmed. People can almost be more forgiving of that when they see the whole you, they see you authentically, than when they don't feel they have that connection to you. And so in many ways it takes the burden off of the leader in that respect, to be able to show that. We have a question here from Kimberly actually about vulnerability. So I think this fits in well here. Kimberly's asking, how can leaders show their vulnerability without blurring the lines of giving too much insight into their personal lives? And I think this is such an important question because there is a line. So can you speak to that a bit?
Well, I think you can share without getting, kind of having this a bit of verbal diarrhea, in that you can say, and you can use maybe another precedent where you've been through a tough time as a leader in the past, and how you kind of, I think about myself, and I often say that in my leadership development, what I would do is if I was challenged to, deal with the situation where I felt uncomfortable or I was triggered, I would often share that with the people that are frontline with me. So I think as a leader, you want to be relatability. Use a story. Use a story that you've learned from, and and then in sharing that story, you're going to kind of be shoulder to shoulder with the employee. You don't have to
Mhm.
explain that, I'm trying to juggle a 3-year-old and a teenager, and the teenager wants to be up till 4 o'clock, and I'm trying to run a board meeting at 6, and my wife's kind of trying to shuttle between, getting the meals prepped and homeschooling. That may be a bit much, but you
Yeah.
can also always share certain things that you feel comfortable with based on a learning experience that you've had, and
Mhm.
then go from there.
Yeah.
And and just kind of check in with your gut and say, how much of this is too much,
Mm.
and what is the lesson that I want to share here? And then from that point, that's what I would say to Kimberly, is just to share from that space.
Mhm. And I think people often fear that by sharing a little bit of their struggles, they'll lose respect. They'll lose that authority that they need over their team to get people to do what needs to be done. And in my experience, it's actually quite the contrary.
Mhm.
But can you talk about that a little bit, about that juxtaposition between vulnerability and the idea that you lose people's regard when you're real?
Well, I think, let's senior leadership positions are taken by people that have high skills,
Mm.
right? And they manage immense levels of stress.
Yes.
And, so I think they're generally, we expect our leaders to act and function at a certain level. But what happens is when times are tough, and I worked for a pretty big consulting firm, and we were going through a major acquisition, and there was immense stress on all the different levels. I could see my direct superior was completely stressed.
Mm.
But instead of sharing that with her team, what she in turn was, her stressors came out is that she was more short, disconnected, and and so in turn, my being part of the senior team, we were all kind of trying to hover and figure out what we needed to do, and we got uncertain on our abilities, and these are all high skill level business people. And in having a conversation with her after, she had said to me after the acquisition, I wish I had had the capacity to just let you guys know
Mm.
that we all are in it together. And this acquisition is a little bit of a fierce one, but you guys, or women and men, have the capacity, and we will all get it through it together. So I think it's that element that when, as a leader, you are aware what you're like, then you let the others around you get to know you on such a level that you create that synergy in your teams that say, oh, this is tough, it's really, really tough, but we can all get through it together.
Hmm. And I think too, when you were talking about, the person you worked for who you could tell they were stressed but wouldn't talk about it. People often can pick up on that anyhow. So, we're trying to have this facade of this perfect leader who has everything under control all the time. And the reality is that nobody has everything under control all the time. I laugh so often at how often people will say to me, "Oh, it seems like you just, everything is you're just this super mom who," and I'm like, "Oh goodness, talk to my children." Nobody sees every side of your life. And I think people can sense though that underlying stress. And so sometimes talking about it, I guess, helps to alleviate that stress within yourself. So again, not talking about it to the extent of using your employees as therapists, but just being real about that you are stressed helps to bring all that back into alignment, where what people are experiencing is consistent with the messages they're hearing.
And to really listen to your teams, right? And say, what are they experiencing? And normalizing that. If you're in this pandemic and you're not anxious or fearful at any point, I'm going to say check your pulse,
Yeah.
really, to some
Yeah.
degree. So when you have teams sharing that, normalize it, discuss it, join with those feelings, and say, okay, so what can we do? What's within our control?
Yeah.
And what kind of things might we be able to do as a leadership team to assist you through it? And then they may come back at you and say, as a leadership team, how are you taking care of yourself? And I think that's the part. We're expecting leaders then to go out and take care of their teams, but the reflective lens needs to come back on the leadership teams to say, okay, what are my points that I need to really kind of take care of. I recognize that, I've been working 14-hour days at the beginning. I recognize that, I'm having an east to west coast. My team's been under stress. What have you done to connect individually with each person on your team? How have people seen you? Like I recently did an interview with a senior leader, and one of his gifts, which I'm not suggesting every CEO go out and do this, but it was an amazing experience. He's a yoga instructor, so he started to include that as part of his senior meetings.
Yeah.
So, and then people were like, wow, this is a different perspective. But again, what are you doing that's a bit different through this time to let people get a window into your life? Because you're all also coming into their living rooms like you're coming into mine. And how is that reciprocity looking? Because we all have to run lives, but we also all have to run businesses.
Yeah.
And I think including things like wellness days that are virtual, you can do that. Why not have a coffee break together?
Yeah.
And then maybe have some of the family members in as part of a 10-minute wrap up just before you finish your business meetings. So it's about being creative at this time, because we are blending home and work. Work-life balance is something that's being defined on terms that it's been unprecedented. When I worked as a consultant, that was always an issue that came up, but now we're having the ability to redefine what work and life balance is really. And I think a lot of people have been doing very, very well with it once we got over the acute stages.
Yeah, it's an adjustment for sure. For myself, who's always worked for home, it was still an adjustment with the kids home. So I can imagine for those who are used to working in the office, it's been a big shift. I just want to get back here looking at a few questions. And before I do that, so Kimberly commented back when we were talking about the sense that if you share struggles, you'll lose respect. Kimberly commented that can be particularly difficult as a woman in leadership. And I think certainly there may be a tendency at times for there to be a societal view of what is sort of stereotypically more that female, empathetic nature to be seen as weaker. And I think what we're all seeing through the pandemic with some phenomenal female leaders is that there's great strengths and beauty in that also. And so I think we're in a nice phase for that to start to shine. Diana here said, I just had an amazing, authentic conversation with my CEO and COO earlier today. What a refreshing change from leaders. And thank you for sharing that, because I think, like you said, Roxanne, I think leaders are under such immense pressure right now, and pressure that they don't always want the teams to know the full reality of, because sometimes it can be quite dire. And I think it's important to celebrate these moments where, they're taking the time to have these conversations. And I do think it's a foundation to being able to keep the team motivated and, as focused as possible, but really gelled together and working together. Patricia here is asking, do you have advice for leaders who are reporting to a board of directors? That's a great question, because those are some tricky dynamics sometimes.
Well, I think again, there's going to have to be a different level of transparency yet again. So again, with your boards, that's a whole different level around communication. Again, boards would have to, your stakeholders, everybody has to keep it in mind. You have to look at your customer base, your boards. How are you going to communicate differently? And yes, there's going to be a level of transparency that you're going to think, how much are we going to share with our board that's going to believe that we're not going to be able to function? But then again, if you're not telling the board about some of the things, the pressures that are new and keep coming, so I think it's a bit of a dance, and we're in a space where we're going to look for successes for boards and executive teams that are doing it well. And I think as the research comes out after the pandemic, or during the pandemic, we will see that at the end of the day, transparency, will come through and through. And, with the massive layoffs that we're seeing, or temporary layoffs, or adjustments that we're seeing in 4-day work weeks, or, some CEOs, I recently also heard that some CEOs have cut their salaries and those types of things. We are seeing innovation in a way that we've never seen before. So I think transparency as much as possible, but that you're going to run and continue to function as optimally as possible, and that you're addressing the concerns that you're seeing with the front line and with your customer base, and that you're doing your best, looking at the reality of numbers and productivity, that you're trying to keep people as motivated as possible. But the reality is that things have been altered, and looking at the true numbers for what they are, and what can you do so that maybe as we go into, the next level, what can we continue to build off that has worked really well?
Mm-hmm. And do you have any tips, Roxanne, for how to maintain that transparent communication in larger organizations? Because what I've seen a lot is that the message has to trickle down to so many people that it sometimes breaks down on the way there, or it gets to, I was going to say the wrong people, not necessarily the wrong people, but it gets, some people hear the message earlier than others, and the ones who didn't hear it probably should have been in the know before, or at least at the same time as others. So because I think a lot of leaders are really well intentioned. They are, they do want to support their employees. The reality is, especially nowadays, if you're panicking to make enough sales to make ends meet to pay your employees, time is a big crunch factor. How can leaders ensure that transparent communication reaches everyone at the right time, and that people can be heard?
I think you have to meet more. That's the thing, right? And that's the last thing anybody wants to hear is more Zoom calls, right? But at the end of the day, I think your senior leadership team has to meet more often, and they have to communicate. What are the best strategies for your environment? If you're going to deliver a message, how is it going to go out? Try to stage it to the point that it's as concise and at the same level, going out at the same time as much as possible.
Yeah.
Identify the leaders that have issues or blind spots around communication. Offer them the training and the coaching that's necessary. Because again, we can pretend that prior to the pandemic, people didn't have issues going off, right? Yeah. We know that that's not the case. But if you've had some residual issues prior to the pandemic, do not act like now I'm going to be all authentic and I'm just going to be respectful and kind.
Right.
Accept it and say, look, we recognize that maybe we were not as transparent as we needed prior to this time. And let's figure out what we're going to do from this point on to do better.
Well, there's the authenticity right there, right? In saying, absolutely. And I've seen that with some companies around Black Lives Matter, messaging saying, hey, we're realizing that we have not been taking a stand. We have not been speaking up. We need to be more consistent in this. We need to change our actions. And I think there's a lot of value in, like you say, just admitting, hey, we're realizing this is something we need to work on moving forward.
We're all in the soup together. And, yes. And just take it for what it is and try your best. But again, don't assume that people are at the same level of communication. Look at your skills of the people that are dispensing the information. So if you start at the senior level team, how are you preparing every level to share what's needed in order to deliver the information? So again, do they have the skills? Do your senior managers have the ability to go to your frontline managers, to go to your frontline employees that's frontward facing to your customer? So again, look at the levels, look at the gaps. Are there gaps? Is there a different communication needed at some levels of the organization versus not? Different subsets, east to west coast, different things around age bands, demographics, female, male compilation, those types of things. Look at your organization from a macro level in reference to communication. And I'm talking to you who talks about communication all the time, and decide, how well are we doing? Like, have you said to your employee base, if you were to give us a scorecard right now, tell us 2 things we are doing really well and 2 things we're doing not so well and 2 things we can improve on.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
And give us some feedback on how that can happen.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I like too how you're talking about identifying the gaps, because I think with that flow of information, because although communication is my area, I do less the macro level. Um, but it's identifying where is it breaking down, where, like you said, identifying those spots where it's not flowing, and figuring out how, whether it's through training or coaching, or reorganizing the processes behind the communication. When you identify the gaps in anything, it's the first step to solving them. So Kate here was saying that she loves the idea of leaders using their talent in their own unique ways. And I like how you spoke to that, about how it's identifying where those strengths are, and using those. So LinkedIn user says, I've seen that issue with large companies in very different time zones, which is kind of what you were referring to here, I think, when you were talking about east to west. Employees on one side of the world found out changes before the other, and that often caused chaos. And so it's, do you have any strategies for those companies who are managing, sometimes it's the time zone plus cultural differences sometimes?
Absolutely. And, I think of it as we're in a crisis situation. And part of my role has been in managing as an executive would be to go into companies when there was a crisis. So think of the pandemic, it's a major crisis.
Yeah.
So what do you do? What do we do? If you think from a neuroscience perspective, our executive functioning goes offline, and then we start to function from the emotional part of the brain, and we all go into a hyper aroused, adrenaline coursed reality. So it's about educating people as much as you can, within 24 hours. Well, we're well past that point. But then what are the facts? Stick to the facts as much as you can, and give the facts of the situation on an ongoing basis. And that's what happens, because when you don't give facts based on a crisis model, what happens is, guess what human beings do? They make stuff up.
Right.
And they gossip monger. And then you have people that have also gone through, maybe have had other challenges around loss or uncertainty or mental health concerns, or they've had arbitrations in the past. Those are employees that you probably need to kind of keep your eyes on more so. So from that model, if we were to just extrapolate that model to the pandemic and look at it and say, how am I keeping my boots on the ground with the facts? How am I going to the players that are involved on the front line, the people, when you're severing an entire subset of a company or an arm because business is down, how are you dealing with the survivors that are left? How are you maintaining their morale? And how are you having them see how you did it? The arm that's been let go, let's say, how did you do outplacement? Did you offer support and coaching? Those types of things, because that social capital is going to go out there in the community for your business. So again, keeping that perspective in mind, and think, okay, you're going to probably go through more change based on what's happening in the markets in whatever business you're in. So again, are you offering those resources? And are you communicating? And when there's another change, how are you dealing with it? And again, the better you deal with recognizing that we may get toppled off again. Okay, so how do I recalibrate as a leader and a leadership team, and adjust and pivot accordingly to think, okay, how are we going to deliver this bad news yet again?
Right. Yeah.
In what format, and what has not worked? What maybe you were well intentioned and you missed a step. Apologize.
Right.
And speak to what people may be experiencing. Call out the feelings that potentially you're feeling as a human being, even though you're the leader, and speak to it and open up the dialogue so people can share what they're experiencing as well.
Yeah. And when you spoke about hyperarousal, what I was thinking about was how sometimes I think too that there's such a state of panic. There's a change that they want to communicate through the organization. I've seen this where, the steps are made to communicate it so instantaneously that there isn't a step back to look at, for instance, okay, when are the employees in Europe going to receive this message? And sometimes taking a step back, and waiting a little bit of extra time to really analyze and determine, okay, is this the best plan moving forward? I think helps to have those gaps not be quite as frequent. And in fairness to, you know, everyone who was dealing with this with their businesses as COVID hit, I think it's, you know, it's the extent of stress that people were feeling is unprecedented, as everyone says. But in reality, you know, it is. And I think that can really influence some of these missteps sometimes. And like you said, being able to just admit to that can go a long way for repairing. So Kimberly here says that offering coaching to your team is a wonderful way to provide training without it feeling formal or like you're pointing out flaws. I love that. And I think the coaching model of supporting employees also gives a really tailored experience to meeting those individuals' needs. Roxanne, I'd love at this point to let you share a little bit about what you do and tell people where they can find you.
For sure. So my business is consulting with leadership and teams around authentic connection. So I truly believe that the more authentically connected leader that has done his or her internal work to develop trust, that transpires onto their teams. And I also work with the teams. I'm in the process of releasing a new book on authentic leadership and leading from the heart. So that's to come in the fall. But if you're ever needing to connect to get a consultation, I can be reached at roxannederhodge.com.
Well, listen, Roxanne, thank you so much for your time. Like I said at the beginning, I think that authentic leadership, I've thought this for a while, let's face it, but I think it is the way of the future. And I think that more and more people are realizing how much it's necessary to keep their teams feeling grounded and secure and engaged and motivated and passionate about what they do. And so by all means, if people are needing support with this, I highly encourage you to reach out to Roxanne. And thank you for watching. Next week, same time, Wednesday at 6 p.m., we will be speaking with Frank Soma, who will be talking about how better relationship building will improve sales. And Frank is a great sales expert and speaker. And so I invite you to join us at the same time next week. So thank you everyone for watching, and we'll catch you next week. Thank you, Roxanne.
Thank you, Lindsay.